I'm Curtis.
And I'm Joey. We are currently juniors at the Miami Valley School taking the AP U.S. History class. Today we are talking about what led up to the Trail of Tears, what the Trail of Tears was, and what the results of the Trail of Tears were. To do this, we are using our textbook American Pageant by David Kennedy, Elizabeth Cohen, and Thomas Bailey. So first things first, what led up to the Trail of Tears?
The story starts in 1816 when James Monroe was nominated for the presidency. He then was inaugurated on Tuesday, March 4th, 1817. James Monroe's presidency was a large part of setting the stage for Andrew Jackson and his relations with Native Americans. James Monroe was elected by two generations, the age of the Founding Fathers and the age of newborn nationalism. This nationalism is what we will be focusing on. Monroe took a goodwill tour in 1817, which bolstered this nationalism even more, creating the era of good feelings. Monroe's presidency also fell in a time of great westward movement. From 1791 to 1819, 9 frontier states joined the Union. This thirst for land, sprouting from the original colonies themselves and pushing into the Native Americans' land, would carry on into Jackson's presidency, and Jackson would have a very unique way of dealing with it.
Andrew Jackson was nominated in 1825 and elected in 1828. He was a tall, lean man with bushy iron-gray hair. He was the first president nominated at a formal convention, the second president to not have a college education, the first being Washington. He won the election because he was a well-known man, lawyer, and landowner. He became a national war hero after defeating the British in New Orleans during the War of 1812. Jackson was also called Old Hickory due to his toughness. An example of this was Jackson's frequent involvement in stabbings, brawls, and blood frays. In one of his many duels, he ended up getting shot twice. Jackson kept the bullets in his body throughout his lifetime, which gave him lead poisoning. Overall, Jackson was a unique guy.
The followers of Jacksonian democracy rejected the elitists of the East and praised the western frontier as a place where people emerged to protect the interests of democracy. They saw Jackson as one of those people. For this reason, they were also very committed to western expansion. However, to expand westward would require confronting the current inhabitants of the land, Native Americans. The whites wanted land, and with Jackson in the presidency, it was definitely going to happen. In the early 1800s, the issue had come down to white settlers encroaching on Indian lands in southern United States. Jackson had complicated history with Indians since he grew up on the frontier settlements, where stories of Indian attacks were common. This started nasty propaganda that called Indians savages and led to the Indian Displacement Act.
As of 1820, there were more than 125,000 Native Americans living east of the Mississippi River, and they had begun to adopt certain aspects of the foreign white settlers' behavior. 5 of the civilized tribes included the Cherokees, the Creeks, the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, and the Seminoles. They were considered civil because they lived in a lifestyle similar to the Americans. Their lifestyle included missionary schools, being successful cotton planters, and also holding slaves. One of the tribes that made the most effort to learn the ways of the whites were the Cherokees.
The Cherokees abandoned their traditional semi-nomadic life for settling down, agriculture, and private property. White missionaries who respected the natives believed that they could assimilate completely. These missionaries began processes to Christianize and civilize Native Americans through schools they ran. Later, a Cherokee named Sequoyah would make a Cherokee alphabet. With this change in lifestyle, the Cherokees would also form a governmental structure known as the Cherokee National Council. In 1808, they would create a written language code, and in 1827, the Cherokee National Council would adopt their written constitution.
This all was perfectly fine because the tribes were recognized as separate nations ever since a decision in 1790. However, in 1828, Georgia's legislature would ignore this decision and rule that the Cherokee National Council was illegal, leaving all tribal affairs and land to Georgia. This was a large step in taking control of the Native Americans' land, and the decision of 1790 had meant that to acquire land from them, the settlers would need to use formal treaties. Georgia's decision not only ignored the fact that the Cherokees were supposed to be viewed as a separate nation, but also that their land must be acquired fairly. The original 1790 decision, however, might have been made superficially in the first place.
A large grab from Georgia would not go undisputed by the Cherokees. They went to the Supreme Court with this issue, and 3 times it was decided that the Cherokees had the rights to do this and keep their land. Jackson would ignore the Supreme Court's decision, famously saying, "John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it." He would then create the Indian Removal Act, which he justified by thinking that if the 5 civilized tribes were moved west of the Mississippi, then their culture would be saved. This poorly feigned mercy was complete nonsense. However, the Indian Removal Act would give the whites the land they wanted and force nearly all members of the 5 civilized tribes west of the Mississippi. It was passed by Congress in 1830.
Also used in justification of the Indian Removal Act was the Treaty of New Echota. It was signed by 100 Cherokees and gave up all land east of the Mississippi River in exchange for land in Indian Territory, as well as the promise of money, livestock, and various provisions, as well as tools and other benefits. Unfortunately, when the Cherokees in support of the removal were signing this treaty, they didn't realize they were signing themselves off to die. Cherokee National Council had passed a law earlier saying that Cherokees agreeing to give up the tribal land would be executed. They not only signed to their own deaths, however, as an estimated 4,000 Cherokee Indians would die in the coming journey. The Cherokees had shown opposition to the removal, but the Treaty of New Echota, having been signed by 100 Cherokees, would be able to be used as justification for the ensuing expulsion of 17,000 tribal members from their land.
The enforcement of the Indian Removal Act was led by the U.S. Army, who had orders from the president. In the summer of 1838, the Army would load the Cherokees onto boats and they would be carried through rivers to their Indian territory. Many Cherokees, while they waited, were held in prison camps. The now President Van Buren, who followed Jackson in 1838, decided to enforce the Indian Removal Act and follow Jackson's plan. He moved all of the tribes east of the Mississippi River to modern-day Oklahoma. This removal is known as the Trail Where They Cried, or the Trail of Tears. This is because not only did the Cherokees, one of the most civilized tribes, get removed from their land, but nearly 17,000 of them had to move 2,200 miles, killing nearly 4,000 due to hunger, exposure, and disease. Also due to the land-hungry whites was the Black Hawk War. This was a war with the Seminole Indians that lasted for 7 years. The Seminoles joined the runaway black slaves and fled to the Everglades. They waged guerrilla war and killed nearly 15,000 slaves. However, the Americans took their leader Osceola. Once this happened, some of them fled deeper into the Everglades, but about 4/5 of them were forced to move to present-day Oklahoma, where their ancestors live today.
The Trail of Tears was a sad and devastating thing. Overall, it was necessary for expansion. Though it was wrong, the Indian Removal Act led to freed-up land to be farmed on for the South. Then it boosted cotton production, which went from almost none in 1787 to 3.6 million 500-pound bales by 1860. However, due to this, the South had to increase the numbers of slaves to harvest the cotton. The Southern economy's reliance on slavery and the increasing Northern opposition to it eventually led to secession of 11 Southern states from the Union into the American Civil War, which has led to overall freedom today. Thanks for watching, and we hope you enjoyed.